Hello, I'm James, I'm 23 years old, and I drive a Mercedes S-Class from 2006. Now, if you're clicking on this video, you're either doing one of a few things. You're looking to buy a W2C1 generation S-Class, you're just curious to see how much it actually costs to own one, or you are thinking about fixing up your own, figuring out how much that those bits might cost. Personally, for me, I do a lot of the work myself. It's very rarely I do end up having to go to the garage, uh, but this is kind of a cost breakdown slash my ownership experience of having the car for well over a year now, and I've covered about 7,000 miles, which isn't a lot, I suppose, in the long run, but I think will show that I at least have an idea of what I'm on about with this car and what you guys can expect. And I think I'll throw in a couple little tips as well. If you do like this video, please like, comment, subscribe, do whatever you want. Follow my TikTok. You probably came here from my TikTok anyway, but if you don't, give it a follow. But I thought I'd start off this video by going for a little drive. So take it away, James in the car. So here we are, we're on a drive, and it runs perfectly. It really does run really well. The interior quality is fantastic. There is a few creaks here and there, but it's a 20-year-old car at this point, so you'd expect there to be one or two eeks and moans and squeezes and all that kind of thing. In terms of how well this thing drives, it drives splendidly. It is not a handling car, it is not something you chuck about on A roads or B roads or anything like that, but it is a cruiser. It is such a fantastic car to just sit down and just drive. This thing, it just chews up the miles for breakfast, lunch and dinner. You could give it a full 5-course meal and it would still be asking for seconds at dessert. There is nothing unpredictable about this car. It goes, it stops, it turns, it leans from time to time, but that's because you're steering a bit too hard or a bit too fast. So it's careful, and that's how it should be driven. Now, as to how I actually got a hold of this car, I'll tell the story now. If you don't want to hear it, jump to this timestamp right here. But in short, I got this car through insurance because I used to drive a 2011 Seat Exeo 6-speed manual with the 2-litre turbo diesel, and it was fantastic. It's the second car I ever bought, and as at the moment stands as my longest serving car. However, I was driving home for Christmas to go to my mum's house, and I got rear-ended on the M5 by a rental van, which was very disheartening, especially because Christmas, no place was open, no courtesy cars, no nothing. So I had to drive that car in the state that it was for 350 miles extra after that crash before I could actually go home. Now, although the damage on the surface doesn't actually look that bad, it was horrendous. The crash bar was completely bent in, the boot floor had crumpled. To actually get the spare wheel out, we had to use a 3-foot crowbar just to pry the bastard out. And like I say, it drove just fine. Surprisingly, after that crash, it was still straight and still drove as it should. And it served me well in its last days of living, but unfortunately, because it got wrote off, I couldn't keep it, and I didn't want to get it repaired, so I went ahead and started looking for my own car. There were 4 criteria these cars had to meet. It had to be a diesel, because I like the economy on longer drives. It had to be preferably a 6-cylinder diesel as well, because I hate the sound that 2-litre diesels make, especially 4 cylinders. Number 3, it had to have 4 doors because I drive people around from time to time, and it's very easy to have 4 doors just for people to get in and out. And number 4 is that it had to be an automatic. Now, the reason I speculated that it has to have an automatic is because it needed to be comfortable, it needed to be something easy to drive. And despite what some people may say to you, it's completely fine to have an automatic. If you want to have a manual as your daily driver, that is completely fine. I find having an automatic as a daily driver much easier, it's much more relaxing to have, and especially in rush hour traffic, it's a lot easier to deal with. I was actually looking for 2 cars in particular that weren't this. I was looking at a Mercedes CLS and a BMW E91 Touring. I was looking at both of these cars because they both came with very good engines. The E91 specifically because of the M57 3-litre diesel, and the CLS because it came with the OM642, which is the 3-litre diesel that Mercedes used to put in their cars. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a E91 Touring in the spec that I wanted with the engine that I wanted, or the gearbox. So I had to scrap that idea, and originally I was going to find a CLS 320 CDI with the AMG body kit, which I think makes the car look brilliant. However, I called up the seller 2 days prior to actually me wanting to go see it, and unfortunately he had already sold it. So I was kind of stuck without having any options because I didn't want a CLS in just standard form. I was browsing through Facebook Marketplace and this came up for sale, and I went to look at it and I bought it. Now, when I bought the car, it had a lot of things wrong with it. This I will go through later. However, so much had to be done. It was very, very rattly. It was very difficult to drive because some of the suspension arms and the bushings had gone completely. It was very awkward to drive. It was quite jittery, and it felt quite nervous on the motorway, and especially when I put my foot down. It just was not right. It's not how this car should drive, and I knew that. However, I'd already spent the money to go buy it, and I bought this car for £2,600 with 130,000 miles on it. Now, whilst I have put a lot of money in investment into this car, that for me is still a bargain. £2,500 for a car that I did double check, and I got the original dealer receipt was £63,000 in 2006. This £2,600 in 2024 could get you what cost £63,000 in 2006. I was gobsmacked. In terms of options, this car had a lot of boxes ticked. It's got radar cruise control. It's got the Harman Kardon system, which was fantastic, in surround sound with the Logic 7, which it shared with the BMW 7 Series at the time. It's got 19-inch wheels with 275s at the back to really keep that torque in motion. We've got air suspension all round, so it is fantastically comfortable. Even going over this road at the moment, which isn't particularly smooth, I can't feel a thing. The reason I went for this car specifically with this engine and gearbox is because my dad has a Mercedes GL with the OM642 and the 7G Tronic gearbox, and at the time his car had 210,000 miles on it. Now I saw this car with 130,000 miles on it and thought, yeah, you know what, that will last me for 80,000 miles and I'll be quite happy with it. I would describe the problems with this car to have been about 80% mechanical and 20% electrical. That 20% really did make up a lot of the final total of what I've spent on this car, purely because of labour and the actual price of getting the parts as well. The sound system of this car is fantastic, or as others might call it, cromulent, which I will now demonstrate with some royalty-free music. The sound system in this is Harman Kardon, specifically Logic 7, which was shared between this and the BMW 7 Series. Now, while the sound system is great, there is a weak point, especially in this early pre-facelift car, with the amplifier. Now, those who know these cars will know about this problem. But as the cars get older and sometimes, you know, the capacitors and the lines will start to age out a bit, the amplifier goes dead, which completely kills the system. It means that there's no radio signal on the dash, that you can't play DVDs or CDs or anything. Now, there's a few ways you can go about it. You can go to Mercedes, which give you two options. You can either replace it with a refurbished amplifier for £1,300, or you can get a new one for £1,800. If you want to go down the used route, the average price on eBay goes from anywhere between £500 to £800. Or you can do what I did and have it rebuilt for £300. Some rebuild companies will actually give you a lifetime warranty as well, so if your amplifier goes wrong again, then you can just send it back to them and have a free repair, which, given as I personally did, I find that to be a peace of mind, so I don't ever have to do it again. There are one or two bones that I do have to pick with this car. One is the fuel economy. It is very good. On a longer run, on a longer drive, it is quite able to do 40 miles to the gallon easily. The highest I've even had it is 46, which to some people would seem absurd, especially if you know these cars. However, around town and around city driving, you're lucky to get 27, 26 even. In fact, in the last 2,500 miles that I've had this car, I have averaged 29.3 to the gallon, which... The other qualm I have with this car is the rear seats, and I don't mean the rear seats in general. They are fantastically comfortable, but the fact is you can't fold them, so the boot is pretty much all the storage you have, which is fine, unless, say for example, you were transporting a 50-inch TV to your new house, and you have to borrow your girlfriend at the time's Renault Clio because the TV doesn't fit in your boot. Safe to say that was a mildly embarrassing moment. I love traffic, I really do. Especially love it when people leave huge gaps in the road. Especially... Okay, it's not going to go in the video. The way this car delivers its performance is predictable and safe, but not boring, I wouldn't say. It does actually sound quite nice for a 3-litre diesel, I would think, and it does a good job of shifting down when it needs to. If I had to compare this car to a character, it would be Alfred Pennyworth, Batman's butler, for those who don't know. It's quiet, it's subdued, it's polite, it's classy, but if you want it to, it will kick ass. It will hold its own. It's tough and reliable. This car has never let me down once, despite all of its foibles, despite everything that was wrong with it and may still go wrong with it. It has never let me down. I've put a lot of money and work into this car, and I've had people come up to me and say, mate, why don't you just pack it in? Why don't you just give it to somebody, sell it to somebody, part X it for something more modern and that may need less maintenance? But they don't get it. They don't get it. But it's something that you or I might get. You develop a bond with the car. It's something like kinship. You know, when something goes wrong, you absolutely hate it and you are upset, and it's difficult to explain. But then when everything's going right, everything's going beautifully, you're just in your own world, loving it, and knowing that you did the work to do that is one of the best feelings you can ever feel. And that's how I feel with this car. It is just brilliant. The amount of work I have done to this has been worth it in my eyes. And any work that I will continue to do on it will still be worth it. Well, that was a nice drive. Now, to start the cost breakdown, we're going to start with the electronics, because that is what has cost me the most money by far, as you can see here. I've only had to replace 2 electrical components, and it's cost me £1,135 for a couple of reasons, but I'll delve into them to break them down a bit more. The amplifier I sent to be rebuilt with a remanufacturing company. That cost me £305, and thankfully that comes with a lifetime warranty. Very good. The electric parking brake module, there was a bit of a mistake on my part, because I went to a garage initially to have it diagnosed. They diagnosed it. That cost me £100. Then I bought a Chinese aftermarket module, which was very stupid of me. So I ended up installing this parking brake module, which isn't too difficult to do. If you've got a few hours in your day, I would recommend it. But be warned, the brackets in the drum brakes can get really stiff over time, so once you are able to get them out, I would loosen them up with some WD-40. Makes them a lot easier to install and remove when you need to, or if you need to do them again. So what you're meant to do as well with these parking brake modules is you do need to get them coded in, otherwise the actuators will go absolutely mental at you. You will have a working parking brake, but when you come to a stop, you will just get it's like a shotgun going off under the car, which is very distracting and very annoying. And after 4 days, it will completely stop working again, and you'll blow up that module. Now, thankfully, I'd learned not to trust the Chinese aftermarket here, and I was able to find a genuine Mercedes module for £150. Whoever sold that, I have to bless you and thank you so much, because I was not prepared to spend £900 direct from Mercedes. Yes, you heard that right. £900 for one of these modules directly from Mercedes, and at the time for me, they were on back order, so wouldn't have worked for me. Once I did get that genuine module, I got it installed and I took it to Mercedes. I'd taken the car with the previous module to Mercedes, and they said they couldn't do anything. 2 hours later at Mercedes cost me £300, and I'd actually changed the electric parking brake switch as well, which I didn't actually need to do, but I thought it was worth doing. So you can see the cost breakdown there. That is how much it costs on electrics for this car. The suspension arms on this car were completely knackered when I bought it, as I will put down photos down here of some of the bushes and some of the ball joints, they were completely gone, which you would expect after 20 years of existence and constant driving and 130,000 miles. Now, to say that this was difficult to do would be a bit of a lie. Again, it's one of those things of, if you've got the time, if you've got the materials, if you've got the tools, it's not a problem. However, you do need to break out the blowtorch for a few of these joints, especially the front ball joints. They are welded in there. And just be sure as well that you have a decent sized hammer, maybe like a 2 or 3 pound hammer, and a lot of anger if you are changing them, because you will need to smack and smack and smack. Who needs a rage room when you've got Mercedes suspension to deal with? The rear thrust arms as well, the bolts for those have to be cut out, and I forgot to put it down here, but I had to replace those bolts, and a bit of a mistake on my part, I bought them from Mercedes and they cost me £17 for 2 bolts, which was kind of ridiculous, but it was all I could do at the time. And I said during that drive that initially that car felt very jittery and quite nervous on the motorway. The rear tyre rod ends were the main concern and cause for that one, because they were very, very knackered. Front thrust arms, you could feel, on the driver's side at the very least, you could feel the bushes and the arms moving around because you could feel the vibration coming through the floor. And although I didn't get a photo of it, the inner bush of that thrust arm was actually starting to separate from the arm itself. So it's good that we caught it when we did, otherwise who knows what would have happened. But as you can see, again, from the cost breakdown here, the front wheel bearings I had bought, not realising that they were taper wheel bearings and I'd be able to adjust them. I did end up changing them, which was a little bit of a faff. I needed a hydraulic press. Thankfully, I had access to one at the time, which made it a lot easier. But be sure to use enough grease. I think it's about, I couldn't tell you what weight it is. I think it's about 75 grams either wheel, something in that region. 75 grams or 150 on each wheel. I can't remember off the top of my head. But as you can see down here, the anti-roll bar links definitely need to be done, especially on the front, because you can see them talking. They're not exactly alive, shall we say. The rear anti-roll bar links weren't in that bad shape, but I felt I needed to replace them anyway. Interesting enough as well, the power steering fluid I bought directly from Mercedes. Now, on Mercedes cars, you can go either one of two ways about it. You can use Mercedes power steering fluid, or you can use Dexron-free automatic transmission fluid, which I think is fine, but it depends on what is already in your car. Personally, I already had power steering fluid in mine, and I didn't want to contaminate that with ATF, so that's what I did. I went to Mercedes, said, hey, can I have a litre of power steering fluid? And they sold it to me for £8. Now, this one's a bit of a weird one for me because I haven't actually installed all of these parts. I've installed the transmission mount, but anything under that I haven't actually installed yet. Partially because I don't have access to a lift, and to get all 4 wheels off the ground to be able to get the prop shaft off is quite difficult, because I'll put a picture down here now. The wheels will literally turn this car into a monster truck of how far they reach down. So very difficult to actually achieve when you've only got jack stands and you can't quite actually jack the rear of the car up properly. I did buy all of this stuff thinking that I had a massive wheel bearing, prop shaft bearing failure. Turns out it was the gearbox mount all along. The car drives smoothly. Top tip as well, if you are getting an Airmatic warning on any of your Mercedeses, check the engine mounts, check the gearbox mounts, because that could be the difference between you spending £30 changing a gearbox mount, or £3,000 taking it to Mercedes and then having to replace the whole system. And that is probably me being kind or generous there. The brakes. Now, 2-ton car capable of 150 miles an hour. Yeah, the brakes are huge. 335mm on the front, 300s on the back. And you can see down here, comparison to my hand, and hand to face as well. That is how big those brakes are. It's ridiculous. However, I should point out as well, I only use name brand stuff. I'm not somebody who likes going on eBay too much. I will if I have to, but a lot of the stuff I do buy is either Febby or Napa, Blueprint, which is just Febby again, and sometimes Quintin Hazel, which I know is technically owned by a less reputable brand now, but they are still quite good. As you can see here, again, front brake discs are the most expensive thing because they are perforated discs. They got a lot of heat going through them, and obviously have to put stop to the car. The pads, and I had to replace one of the front, the driver's side front brake hose because it was starting to weep. The rear brake discs and pads, be sure to let off on the parking brake shoes, otherwise you're just going to be hammering that disc brake off and you're going to pull off the whole system with it. May or may not be speaking from experience. The drum brake springs, when I was changing the electric parking brake module, accidentally snapped one of the springs, which was a bit of emergency, but I was able to find an entirely new set of drum springs at my local parts dealer for £10, which was fine, and brake fluid, which is just .4 plus. I can't seem to find it at most places, but I got it on Amazon, so it was fine. That was Febby liquid as well. That was for a litre, and just spread the brakes through, and it's now got lovely fresh fluid. As you can see here, the engine has actually been quite kind to me. It's been relatively well serviced in the past, and hasn't actually needed that much maintenance. The auxiliary belt, as you can see below me right now, was well beyond its sell-by date, and I was quite glad that I got that one. The turbo seals were the first thing I did because there was a bit of an oil leak coming from under the intake manifold. The turbo intercooler hose, again, 20-year-old rubber, doesn't exactly like staying in one piece, let alone 20-year-old rubber, but that's under constant pressure. That cost me £63 from Mercedes. The timing chain tensioner, top tip on that one, keep a pry bar, or I used a breaker bar to be able to push the timing chain guides from the oil fill cap, because if you don't, you will not be able to get the actual new tensioner in place, and you won't be able to lock it into the threads at all. And the glow plugs, I only actually need to change one, so I've got 3 of them sat in my desk right now. But just be sure that when you do change them, soak them in WD-40 for a couple of days afterwards, or just whatever rust penetrant you like to use. Mine came out quite easily and thankfully wasn't too difficult to replace. I've listed this as miscellaneous costs because it's stuff that isn't exactly related to all of the other categories here. The engine oil cap was just leaking. I could have probably got a new seal for it, but it was cheaper for me to go ahead and get a new oil cap. That cost £7. The engine cover grommets were causing the engine to rattle, and really, if you get it at the wrong time, it sounds like the engine is knocking, or there's valve tapping, which is not pleasant at all. Those cost me £5. The wheel bolts, these suffer a little bit from expansion, so I actually broke 2 17mm sockets when I first wanted to change the wheels on this car, or take the wheels off, I should say. So if you don't have a impact socket, maybe leave it, get a 17mm impact socket, something that you can hammer on to get those wheel nuts off. Cup holders. Mercedes in the 2000s didn't think that cup holders were important, which is very annoying. Thankfully, you can buy aftermarket plastic trims that go in the storage bin in the center console. Wheel center caps, again, that's just personal preference. You can miss that if you want. I had to change the front left-hand side fog light because at some point it had been smashed, which is impressive because they're made of glass. So I'd love to know at what speed and what actually hit the fog light for it to smash. These are your yearly service costs. 10 litres of engine oil you can actually get from Mercedes directly for about £50 or £60. And again, this is Mercedes brand oil, which I believe in Europe at the very least is actually Fuchs oil, but at a much discounted price, which is very handy. Febi air filters cost me £17. A Febi oil filter was £7. I believe I used Crossland cabin filters because on some of these you can get cabin activated, charcoal activated panel filters, but they cost £110 and I wasn't going to buy those. Now, insurance costs me roughly £1,000. Again, bear in mind, I'm 23 years old. I've got an incident on my record. I have a few years on my driver's license and a few years no claims. So it really does depend. It depends on your area, depends on your age. Insurance is one of those things that you just can't really explain. But bear in mind with this one, and this is what drew me to this car at the very least, is that nobody my age at the very least drives an S-Class. Very few people younger than me drive S-Classes. In fact, the next person I know that does have an S-Class is in his late 50s. So it makes it a lot easier to insure than, say, a BMW 3 Series or an Audi A4, or even a Mercedes E-Class or C-Class with the same displacement. So we come to the final cost of everything. After a year of ownership, the total cost has been £2,400, which is a little misleading. After taking out some parts that I haven't used yet, or taking away mistakes, especially with that parking brake, that becomes £1,600, which, again, depending on the person who buys this, is it could be a drop in the water, it could be a massive investment. Personally, for me, this is a car that I bought cheap. As you can see here, it's £2,600 for a 2006 S-Class. And this car, back in 2006, when it was bought, was £63,000. It has optional extras, which I love having. The Harman Kardon sound system, for example. The radar cruise control, which makes it so easy to drive on the motorway. The 19-inch wheels, which I think that make this car look fantastic. And compared to this other S-Class, I think it looks a little bit better. Now, it's up to you whether you want to buy one of these cars or not. Obviously, I've not put in here stuff like fuel costs or wear and tear items like tyres. Because a set of tyres, for budget tyres, you're looking at about £350. If you want something decent rubber, something like Michelin or Bridgestone, you are looking north of £500 to £600 at the very least. Anything going up to about £1,000 for a set of tyres, but that is up to you on what you do. Personally, I'm going to try save for a decent set of tyres. Now, do I regret it? No, I don't personally. I've got a car that I love having and a car I love driving. It's given me a lot of highs and a lot of lows. It's given me the most stress of my life. But you get in it, and it's just wow. It is just wow. In Germany, initially, these were called Sonderklasse, or special class, which you can look at in two ways, as me being a bit special, or the car itself being special, and that is how I feel. It is potentially one of the best S-Class generations around. It is so versatile in what it is as well. It could be a foreign dignitary's car. It could also just be a taxi in Munich. It's the beautiful thing about these is that they are used for everything, and especially if you get the OHM 642, the parts are plentiful. Now, things that you do need to look out for when you are buying them, of course, play the radio, make sure that the amplifier works. If you are looking for a car with a Harman Kardon system especially, listen for knocks, feel for bumps and jitters, especially on the motorway. If you're able to test drive it, make sure you are thorough. You cannot be thorough enough when it comes to these cars. You always check and find something that is wrong. However, a couple of tips and tricks I have found at the very least. You'll have a small fuel leak on the fuel filter of your car. Now, that is because usually the left-hand side fuel pipe that goes into the fuel filter, I believe actually is the outtake pipe or something along those lines. That is usually leaking just at the edge of the pipe itself. Unclip it. There's plenty of hose to be able to cut off and completely lose the leak in general. Sometimes as well, if you change your fuel filter, you might get this engine code pop up, which to you or me may not actually make any sense. I ended up clearing this code by spraying my MAF sensors with brake cleaner and cleaning them out, and it's run just fine, and the engine light hasn't come on since. Now, as I said at the start of this video, I'm quite lucky to be able to do the stuff to this car by myself and not having to take it to garages. Yes, I've spent a lot of money on parts, but I've been able to install them when I need to and have the time to be able to install them and do it properly as well. There's plenty of documentation out there to be able to talk these things up properly and properly install them. If you don't have the time nor the money, I wouldn't recommend buying this car at all. If you are somebody that doesn't know a thing about cars, don't buy a 20-year-old Lambo. Trust me, it is not the move for you. Because if this was a case of going to the garage constantly, that bill, like that total cost, repair cost right there, could be double or even triple the amount that I've actually spent on the car, which I would call a little bit ridiculous. I've spent nearly the value of this car on this car. And maybe it's ridiculous, but for me, it's been worth it. For me, that is just fine for me to have done and got out the way. Because I've spent this money now, so I don't need to in the future. For the upcoming years, or who knows, even months, I have got a completely working car that is fantastic and, again, 20 years ago was the best thing on the road. Another tip I would have as well is, surprisingly, do contact Mercedes about parts and about fluids as well, specifically like engine oil, power steering fluid, all that kind of thing. Some of them are actually cheaper than aftermarket. It's actually quite surprising, especially when, I say, with the prop shaft bearing, for example, I expected them to turn around and be double the cost of the aftermarket options. But no, and remember that there aren't actually that many aftermarket options for these cars to begin with. So that is up to you. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe, give it a like, give it a comment. If there are any more questions that any of you have, again, comment down below. I'll be happy to answer them. Again, follow my TikTok for random car content and whenever I bother to upload, really. This is kind of my first go at longer form content. some of my videos on TikTok have been about 5 minutes long. I think this is going to be about 15-20 minutes long. I'm not sure yet. We'll find out in the edit. But if you've enjoyed, thank you for watching, and I will see you whenever I upload next. Ta-ra.